Hi, greetings from Brisbane, Australia. My name is Peter Caudron and I'm producing this video for the Worcester Public Library in Massachusetts, who are currently reading my science fiction novel Retrograde, which is set on Mars. And before we get into the book itself, I'd like to introduce you to my chief editor, Newman. He's taking a bit of a break there in the background, just stretching out and enjoying a lazy Friday morning here in Australia. This cover was designed by American artist Elizabeth Leggett, and she worked in a number of details that I wanted to just talk about because they convey quite a bit of accuracy, and you can see the cover itself is quite beautiful. It's finished with this golden sheen that just causes the light to really play on it quite beautifully as you move it around here. You can see there's an astronaut down here in the foreground, and they're exploring this ancient riverbed, and you can see how the waterway has caused channels to form. They've got this beautiful rock formation in the background with some sedimentary layers. In the background here is what would equate to a salt lake on Earth. In other words, an expanse that has had water at one time for a very long time. Lots of sedimentary layers have built up. It's really flattened the landscape, and now it's all dried up. So just this beautiful depiction of what the surface of Mars would be like. And you notice the difference in the coloration. You've got this ruddy color here, but it's not overly red. It's more like a rusty color. And then in the background, it's almost yellowish. And this is because the light that we would see on Mars is very different to the images that we've seen. So all the images that you see from NASA are slightly enhanced just to make them a bit more visual, a bit more realistic. And when it comes to movies, of course, they really dial up the red to make the red planet come to life. And so you have everything's this brilliant ochre red. In reality, even with the thin atmosphere, there's quite a lot of dust on Mars, and that's going to sort of cause a little bit of a haze, and distant mountains will appear more sort of soft brown. And you notice here in the background, the sunset is blue. This is one of the interesting features, just a difference between Earth and Mars due to the different atmospheric contents. We get these beautiful red sunsets. Somewhat ironically, on Mars, as the sun sets, it brings a blue tinge to the sky and a blue tinge to the way that the sun appears as well here. Although the astronaut has a visor on, it's not likely that you would need a visor, sort of a sun shield on Mars. Reason being that it's so much further away from Earth that it only gets about 45% of the light that we get. So the brightest day on Mars is going to be like an overcast day here on Earth. But I love this cover. I think it just is quite intriguing, and I love the way that it just captures so many details about what it would be like if you were standing on the Martian surface and looking around. There is a sequel to the book, by the way, which is called Retrograde. So after the events in Reentry. After the events in Retrograde, we return to Earth, and so again you've got this beautiful contrast in the covers, where they've got this similar design, similar fonts and layouts, and yet just entirely different. One is teeming with life, the other is devoid of life. So quite something. If you're interested in the concept of AI, artificial intelligence, and of course that's been in the news a lot over the last sort of 18 months with the rise of ChatGPT. You might be interested in this book as a follow-up because it delves into artificial intelligence. And of course this is something that scientists and science fiction writers alike have considered in a lot of detail. And some people, most notably the late Stephen Hawking, considered AI could become an existential threat. The ability for artificial intelligence to outstrip human intelligence is a very real possibility. And so in this book, I look at what form that could take and what possible solutions there are to it and look at how what we call artificial intelligence today is really mimicry. We're dealing with the equivalent of a computerized parrot. It's very good at spouting things back, but there's no real depth of understanding there. And of course, with things like ChatGPT, they can be very useful to recall well understood principles, but can go off into what's called hallucinations when you ask it about things that it doesn't really have a good set of training data behind. But there's no real intelligence in ChatGPT. Intelligence is the ability to consider information, so to consume information and then make a considered judgment on it, to really balance things out and make a clear decision. And that's something that AI still hasn't mastered today. So it's artificial but not intelligent. Where it's going potentially is more interesting to me, and that is artificial sentience, artificial life, artificial consciousness, artificial self-awareness. And that's what this gets into, and it looks at some of the ethical and moral dilemmas around that. So it's a great follow-up to Retrograde. If you do enjoy Retrograde as a novel, I highly recommend Reentry as well. You should be able to find it in the library there. They're a wonderful pairing as a book, as a story. I thought you'd be interested just to know that it has also been translated into other languages. So this is the German version, which is called Habitat. In the French version, they took a few liberties with the cover. We've got a nuclear explosion on Mars there, but it is still quite beautiful. We do hear a lot in the news about the possibility of exploring Mars. We've, of course, got rovers there. We've got satellites in orbit. The US and China have both got probes on the surface. And Elon Musk is developing Starship with the intended goal of wanting to get to Mars. Life on Mars is not going to be easy, and I think there's a danger that it gets undersold, not only by people like Elon, but even by science fiction authors like myself. The reality is it's an incredibly harsh environment, far harsher than anywhere on Earth. Really the only close analogy we have is somewhere like Antarctica, but even that pales in comparison to just how extraordinarily difficult it will be to live on Mars. And so if you're interested, this is a non-fiction book called A City on Mars, and it goes into the practical, pragmatic aspects of what it would take to actually set up a colony, and looks at some of the real-world challenges that would be faced, and just that it's far more difficult than just firing a rocket ship off and landing on the surface, getting out and collecting a few rocks. If we want to have a sustained presence on Mars, it's going to take a colossal effort. And as much as we might want to think that Mars could be a backup for Earth, it could be Earth too, that's really not realistic. It's a bit of a flight of fantasy. I think Elon should leave science fiction to the science fiction authors. The reality is that Mars will never be able to compete with Earth. Physically, it's far too small. Its gravity is too small. It doesn't have a magnetic field to protect the inhabitants, so that you can see people really have to live beneath the soil, or at least in domes that are covered and protected with layers of dirt. Surface time would be very limited to reduce the exposure to radiation that would cause cancer. The atmosphere is so thin that it's not going to be viable for anything like crops. Those are all also going to have to be in some sort of sealed habitat, and all of that just presents massive logistical challenges that that need to be thought of very carefully and very rationally. We certainly have the ability. The cost is going to be absolutely prohibitive for very minor gains. So if you are interested in the reality of what it would take to live on Mars, I do recommend this book. I also have some other books. I've written an entire series called First Contact, There's 27 novels in the series, and here's just 2 of them. The Artifact, which came out in December, and this one, of course, which I thought would interest you, called Losing Mars. And this is quite the contrast to Retrograde and Reentry. This one is about a colony on Mars and what could go wrong and what could spell disaster for it. So lots to enjoy there. Thank you for taking the time to read Retrograde. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. It was a fascinating look at just the dynamics that might unfold in a distant colony, particularly when you're dealing with different nationalities and different drivers and different interests that people have, different cultures, and what would happen when those come under the pressure of an external calamity and disaster. So thank you very much. Enjoy the book, and I hope to see you around. Cheers.